What's up, everybody? Welcome to Real Time for the Real Everyday Movie Fan, and we are starting a new segment here on Real Time, and it is called the Shakespeare Challenge. So, for those who don't know, out of the three of us here at Real Time, I am something of a growing Shakespeare aficionado. I've read about 12 of the 37 plays of the Bard,
And I
so
have not.
still a newbie. I think everyone had to read Romeo and Juliet in high school, though, right?
Yep,
So
I've read that
I
one at
did.
least.
And I've seen a handful of the films, but Josh, I think now correct me if I'm wrong, but you have in high school you said you watched Romeo and Juliet,
Yep,
the Baz Luhrmann version, and then recently you watched the Joel Cohen's The Tragedy of Macbeth.
yep. But I've also
Or
watched. I mean, I remember watching a version of Hamlet back when I was younger, black and white. I've read Hamlet and I've read Romeo and Juliet. That's it. But I've also, I
I'm
mean, like
impressed
I've
you've read
also
Hamlet.
seen other films that were inspired by the Shakespearean stories, but not like
Sure,
literally. You know what I mean? Like
sure. Like
those.
10 Things I Hate About You, which
Yeah.
is
Or
which
I know
is
you
a
hate
which
using
is
the
a
phrase, but like Lion King or I know. But other
not fucking
forms,
Hamlet.
but other films that have inspired, like that have been inspired by some form of Shakespearean tale
Sure.
or play.
Hmm.
So, but this challenge is very interesting because Ryan, you're having me watch literal, uh,
Yes.
adaptations from his plays that are made into films.
Hmm.
Which is not a bad thing. I mean, so for everyone listening here, if you like our content, you like we're providing other stuff we have for you in the future, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell to receive all of our other great content. Ryan still does interviews with Hollywood industry leaders when he can. He's going to be taking himself out to Hollywood there soon and shooting his shot.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it's officially to say that now, I think, because you.
It's Facebook official. Yeah, my family knows. So
Yep. But now
yeah.
our audience does. But
Hmm.
also I'm gonna be doing some reactions to the Super Bowl tonight if I have time, and then of course movie reviews that I do, and as well me and James are doing The Last of Us. So follow all of our content as we go along. Now,
And
what
Star
have
Trek. James and I are doing Star Trek reviews for the
yes,
next
they're gonna
like
be doing Star Trek
year.
reviews. That's pretty excited.
Yeah.
I'm a next generation person. I've watched that's about all I've watched when I was a kid. That was it.
And you should be thrilled. Well, we're getting off topic, but you should be
Yeah, we're getting
thrilled
off
about the
topic,
new
but
season. Okay. All right. So
so
Josh, let us know Taming of the Shrew. Now, this first of all, some preludes to this. Um, Taming of the Shrew is one of Shakespeare's comedies. It's one of like the original rom-coms. Everyone that knows Shakespeare for his tragedies, like Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet, but he actually wrote more comedies. And his comedies, and you've seen a little bit of not Midsummer Night's Dream. You've seen a little bit of Much Ado About Nothing, which I showed to you and James as sort of a
right.
little event, and so you know that he wrote kind of the original rom-coms. He kind of wrote, before rom-coms, or maybe they were a thing, but still before rom-com movies were a thing. He made
Yep.
these rom-coms back in the day. And this particular movie comes at a very interesting time in film history. It stars Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, who, if you don't know, were really the original Bradgelina. They were really the original, the very like. Remember, Hollywood was new.
Yep.
Movies really about 1915 is when feature-length movies became a thing, and
This is
so
this
they
was like during the silent era too. That's when it kind of
silent era,
yeah.
and they both became big movie stars, and they became a hit couple. And of course, just like Brangelina, just like Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, just like a lot of them, it was marred by scandal. They were both married at the time, blah blah blah, but they became a big Hollywood hit couple. And this was, and then sound happened. And
Yep.
this was, I know Mary Pickford, it was only her second talkie, but for her first talkie, she won the Oscar. For only the second Oscar ever given out. At the second annual Academy Awards, she won Best Actress for a film called Coquette. So this was her second. I'm not sure if Douglas Fairbanks, I had meant to look this up, but whatever. I'm not sure if Douglas Fairbanks had done one, but this was a talkie. And what better way to come into sound, like, I
Yep.
don't know how true this is, but we've all seen the sound of music, not the sound of music. Geez. We've all seen Singing in the Rain,
Yep.
where they kind of talk about how silent film actors weren't taken seriously at the time by theater actors, right? So what better way to sort of start being taken seriously in talkies than by doing Shakespeare? And so they
Yep.
did The Taming of the Shrew. And this story, if you don't know, 10 Things I Hate About You is a loose adaptation of this
Very
story.
loose. And we're talking
Yeah.
super loose
Yeah.
because things that happen in this movie, we'll talk about it. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah.
But enough of me talking. Josh, this is your popping your cherry, so to speak. What did you think of the very first Shakespeare talkie?
Well, so to go, one of the things I was when you announced this film, I knew about this film before you introduced me to want to watch it because I knew it was one of the first three essential talkies, if you will, with actual audio involved with the film. So I was like, okay, so I saw the first two, so I was like, okay, now I want to see this one. So I was kind of excited, but at the same time, I was like, you know, it's
Shakespeare.
it's Shakespeare because that was one of the things I was going into that I know I'm gonna have trouble with until we get to more modern stuff. Is
Mhm.
the main overall I liked it. I thought it was funny, but from what I understood, there were certain times where they would say these lines. I'm like, the fuck are they? Like, I'd have to think about it for a while. I'm like, okay, what does that mean exactly? Like, they're talking in the very traditional Shakespearean Old English, and I'm just like, you just kind of get lost. I got lost sometimes. But that's not on that's on my part, not the film, because it's back then people could understand that, especially if you followed Shakespeare or Shakespearean plays. Not but you know what I mean. Like
Yeah.
that was more knowing how the structure of sentences back then was more well known back in the 20s than
It's
it is now.
has more. I don't know if that's really the case, but it has. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, um, so yeah, I mean, coming into this, I was excited, and it was only about an hour long. I still enjoyed it, but I will say, like I said before, things that happen in this film, if this was like to release today, like wide release, oh my god, there would be canceled. People would be canceled all over the place.
What in particular? Go ahead. Spoilers galore. Spoilers
Yeah,
from this
spoil. So
one.
I mean, this has been out for over
It's
almost
been over
100
a
years
hundred,
now.
almost 100 years, and the
Almost
place
100
is
years
about
now. So I
400.
mean, yeah. Um, so like one of the things is when the main actor, sorry, I forgot his character name. I'm blanking on it.
Shrew.
Yeah, Trucio. When he first gets introduced to her, all of a sudden they both have these whips. And so like he's like throwing her around like a rag doll almost, and like talking to her like she's like a like belittling her. And there's like these a lot of these moments where he's just being an ass. But it also, I mean, she is very mean and cruel to her father, the people she lives with. So I mean, take that for what you will. But like they're like when he was like he'd force her to kiss him or holding her down to make it seem like
Mhm.
they're in love. And I'm just like, man, this somebody'd see that in theaters, they fuck, I want my money back. But it's
Yeah.
still like you got to think of the time back in 1929. I mean, that was part of the comedy, I guess. But because also I mean she would whip him with her whip, and he nothing would affect him. I'm sure it did, but he didn't want to save face. But then also like at the end when she gets the revelation that he's basically killing her with kindness, like being rude to her, but it's also make it seem like he loves her, kind of thing. And so then she turns the tables in a way that again some people may not like because she's pretending to be subservient and all this stuff like he wants, but she's in control, kind of thing. Which that's an old way of thinking that some like you've seen it in other films like in the 90s and the 80s, like how they would treat their husbands and whatnot, but that's very old traditional way of thinking. It's a lot different now. But just things like that. But the comedy, other aspects of the comedy was actually pretty funny. Like there were certain
Mhm.
lines that were said that made me kind of laugh. Then there were certain ones like the sneezing scene. I just was like, that's I get it. It's supposed to be physical comedy, but I didn't find it hilarious at all. Um, but I mean, I still had a good time watching it. I mean, I'm glad we're kind of doing this because this helps me open my. There's also like, I will admit when I've made my so I have this list. Not many people know this. I have this top 15 or no, yeah, top 15 films of each decade. Like they were considered like the best of that decade, and I have a list of every single one from going from the 1920s to now to the 2010s. And so every once a week or every 2 weeks, I pick a film from there and I watch it. So I can, give myself to that tradition or to something more modern that I haven't seen yet. I will admit, I looked at your list and I don't think there's not one of them that are on my list. So doing this will help me again broaden my cinephile list, as you will. But so I want to ask you, Ryan. So now that you've rewatched it, because you had to rewatch it in preparation for talking with me.
No, I'd never seen it before. In fact, I'd never read the play before. Like I said, I've only read 12 of his plays, and this one I read this past week. I actually messaged you. I said, "Hey, let me read the play. I like to read the play first, before I see a performance of it." And I'd never read it before. I've always been familiar with the play because I was a big fan of 10 Things I Hate About You,
Right.
back in the day. So I'd always heard about it. So I had some anticipation for this. Plus, I really like Much Ado About Nothing, so I like Shakespeare's comedy. But what were you going to ask?
No, so now that you've seen the film too, what did you think in comparison to the play you read?
I was very disappointed by this play. Shakespeare, I'm gonna hot take. I think Shakespeare aficionados might kill throttle me through the screen. I think this is not one of Shakespeare's best plays, which is it's one of his most famous. It's had two feature film adaptations. We'll hopefully eventually get to the 1967 version with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, um, which so is the next greatest Hollywood hit couple. So, but I just and then the film didn't the film is just a product of the play. I will say, like, in terms of things the film did well, like you have to keep into account. One of the biggest things you can judge a Shakespeare film on as an adaptation is the stage direction, sort of the golden rule, because obviously you do the dialogue, you don't alter the dialogue or anything. There's a line in the famous Jet Jackson where he's doing a production of Julius Caesar, and you might remember this episode. And he's having
Yeah.
trouble with the line, and he says, "Can't he just say this?" And the teacher says, you don't change Shakespeare. You can abridge it." And this is actually a heavily abridged production, actually. That's why
Yeah.
it's only an hour long. But you don't change it. So the rule of thumb is, you do the dialogue, you can abridge it, but you do the dialogue. But Shakespeare has almost no stage direction whatsoever. If you read the plays, it literally just says enter, exit, maybe kisses her, but nothing else. So one of the things that you really can judge an individual adaptation on is what they add in terms of stage direction. So the stage direction in this, the things people were doing, was funny. Some of it was funny. There was a scene with an apple that was a running gag, and there
Yeah,
was
during the wedding ceremony
yeah.
where he's just eating an apple, you're just like, and the fact that he wore a boot on his head, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, but he's doing it on purpose. I get it.
Yeah.
He's being this to basically try and, I guess you use the word tame because he's taming the shrew, but
But
basically
that's the
trying to be a
thing. It's just
bigger
like,
jackass.
so
uh,
what I was always told about this play is it's about a young woman who's a shrew. She's a handful. She's a difficult woman. And he tames her. He marries her for the money, and
yep.
he they sort of fall in love, and he makes a better woman out of her. And so that's kind of what I was expecting. So the movie starts, the play starts, whatever, and they just talk about how horrible she is, and then you see her throwing things. Like, there's no
Yeah.
real talk about why is she throwing things? Why is she terrible other than the fact that she's throwing things? She's just a shrew, and to establish that, we have her throwing some shit. Okay. Um, so I'm not really saying why she's terrible. I really don't. I do see why he's terrible. He's a piece of work.
He's a piece of trash.
He's a piece of trash. And then once they get married, it's immediately becomes like an abusive marriage.
Yeah.
Like I mean, you feel bad for her because it's like she's realizing, like, this is who I have to live with now for the rest of my life. Like, this is fucked up. And then they play some mental games, and he's abusive and she's whatever, and then they're in love. And I'm like,
Sort of.
I didn't buy the story. So sorry, Bill. Sorry, William Shakespeare. But this is not one of your better plays. Now, Much Ado About Nothing, I'm a tremendous fan of. Give me that play 20 times over, but this one, not so much. So you might recommend this more than I.
I mean, if you like to give yourself into like early cinema, especially at the beginning of what we call talkies, but the eventual what we know as cinema now with audio and video, I would
Mhm.
say just put on your list of the fact that you say you saw it, whether you liked it or not. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those historical ones because it was one of the first three to be with audio video together. Now I will say I don't know if it was the because we watched it on YouTube. It's free on YouTube, by the way, if you want to check it out. Just put in
It's
Taming.
actually public domain, so yeah.
Yeah, it's called the Taming of the Shrew, 1929. Look it up. You can watch it there. It's about an hour and 5 minutes long. But towards the middle and towards the end, I don't know if you've noticed, but the audio and video was not
No,
synchronized.
they weren't. Not in the version. Not in
At
the
first
version
it
I
was
watched.
fine. At first it was on point, but then something happened, and I don't know if this is from YouTube or if this was the film itself was released that way. You know what I'm saying?
No,
But
yeah, it wouldn't have been released that way, but yeah.
yeah, so I mean that's one of the so I can't fault if it's on YouTube's part, then I can't fault the film. But it's just something I had noticed. I'm like I didn't know what was the case. You know what I mean? But definitely, I mean, watch for that reason. I mean, it may trigger some people. I mean, for me, it was just, I mean, it definitely probably will. But just to say, it's one of the first, like I said, it's one of the first 3 talkies, and then just see if you say you saw it for that reason. Like there is some fun comedy in there that's not, offensive. But then there was certain comedy bits that I didn't even laugh at. It's kind of like
Yeah,
didn't
are you
land
sure it's
for
one
me.
of the first 3 talkies? Because I know there
I'm
before that
pretty
there was the
positive.
jazz singer, there was the jazz singer, there was Wings, and there was Coquette. So that's at least 3 right
Let me
there.
look it up. So I thought that's what I read somewhere, unless
I should have opened
sorry,
this up.
we're just doing this on the fly here, guys.
Should have opened this up by being like,
Right?
"Good morrow, welcome thou to Real's time
I thought about
for
doing mine
thine
in black
everyday."
and white.
Yeah, we can still do that.
making myself look in black and white. All right, so sorry guys, I'm just looking through this real fast.
Thinkest thou I care for a satire or an epigram? Nay, since I do purpose to marry, I will think nothing to anything the world can say against it, and therefore never flout at me for what I have said against it. Sorry, I was just
Okay,
filling
so
time by
there's
quoting
a
people.
technicality in it. It was one of the first 3 talkies to be made. It was not released until much later after some movies already had been released.
Okay.
So I guess you can say it wasn't one of the first 3 to release, but it was one of the first 3 to be made initially during its time. And it wasn't released until, well after some other films have been released at the time. So I think I think that's what I read that I was referring to. But yeah, I mean, that's about all I can say about it. I mean, I'm looking forward to doing these. We're gonna do these once a month. Where Ryan he has a list for me. I watched one, and then we'll probably this was one's for January, so we'll go back and watch. I'll watch one probably next week for us to review for February. What's the next
Yes.
one we're reviewing, Ryan?
A Midsummer Night's Dream from 1935.
Okay,
So we'll
is
get
that
a
a
little bit more.
rom-com too? Is that more of a
That's definitely a rom-com. Yeah.
okay?
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Never. I mean, so you gotta realize. I mean, I don't have a deep depth of what all Shakespeare has written and done. So like I know the
Well,
big
you read
ones.
Hamlet. I was impressed to hear you say that. That's like, oh shit. I didn't read Hamlet until, college and
Yeah.
like
So
that was
I
only
mean,
because I was in the production of it.
yeah. So yeah, I know the big. I know the big ones, but that's about it. So like this one I'm here, I'm like never heard it before. So I'm going in it. I'm gonna go. So some of these I'm just gonna go in with no previous research or anything. I'm just gonna go and watch the film for what it is, and so we'll go from
Sure.
there. So, but yeah, that'll do it for today, folks. Thank you so much for watching. We'll make these kind of short and sweet because I mean, especially ones like this is only an hour and 5 minutes long. There are certain, like I said, there's certain things I like and didn't like, but overall, I mean, it was good for historical value. But for you guys out there, if you have seen it, I don't know if there's anybody out there who has watching this here, but if you have, what did you think of it? Jump in the comments, share your thoughts, and give us your positives and your negatives. If not, go back and watch it and then jump in the comments and let us know what you thought of it. Also, if you like our content and what we provide to you guys, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you receive all of our great content we have for you here on Real Time. That's all we have for today. Again, I am Josh Williams.
I'm Ryan Murphy
Thank you for keeping it real
with Real Time.